For Root Source, this is Rabbi Aryeh Leifert teaching Proverbially Speaking, wisdom from the book of Proverbs. In this course, we learn selections from King Solomon's book of Proverbs and understand how these verses from over 3,000 years ago can impact and improve our lives today. I invite you to visit my website, walkingisrael.com, where you can get information on the tours I run for Jewish and Christian families. We begin a new chapter. Chapter 4, verse 1. Shim'u vanim musar av v'hakshivu lada'at bina. Sons, or children, heed the discipline of a father, listen and learn discernment. In a previous session, in chapter 3, we learned a verse which essentially said, don't reject the rebuke of God, because God only rebukes a person whom he loves, and in that sense God is our parent, and a parent is very concerned about his own child and keeping that child on the right path. If we would see a random kid in the street misbehaving, we would not have the same inclination to go over and set him straight as we would if it were our own kid. It doesn't mean we don't care about society, but we would just feel that there wasn't the same kind of obligation or responsibility on our part to keep that child in line. After all, he's not my kid. Let his parent deal with it. I have enough issues with my own kids. When we are dealing with our own children, that is, when we are dealing with people whom we have an obligation to care about, hopefully we'll care about them regardless of having a formal obligation. But whether it's our own kids, whether it's just people in general in our lives whom we care about, one of the ways we show that we care is by, at times, giving rebuke. In a proper way. We can't make the situation worse. We have to be fair in our criticism. It has to be measured. We have to stick to the issues at hand. But if you don't care about someone, then you're not going to get involved when he's doing the wrong thing. So King Solomon tells us, heed the discipline of a father. A father is only going to criticize his children if he cares. And as I said, it needs to be fair, and also it can't be 90% criticism, 10% praise. I don't know exactly the proper ratio of criticism to praise, but I think a fair question to ask ourselves before we criticize someone is the following. If I would be criticized as often as I'm criticizing a kid or my spouse or my friend, while at the same time receiving as little praise as I'm offering my kid, my spouse, my friend, would I feel that the critic really loves me, really cares about me? Or is the critic doing it so that the critic feels better about himself? Look, I can point out all that's wrong with you. If we can't answer that question in the positive, in that we would still feel loved despite all of this criticism, or rather due to all of this criticism, then maybe we should take a step back and say, wait a second, maybe I'm criticizing too much. Maybe I'm criticizing unfairly. And if we have to err, let's err on the side of praising too much as opposed to criticizing too much. We can always find things to criticize. But maybe the ratio should be, for every one criticism, let's come up with 2 praiseworthy acts. Even if it's just a little thing. When your child comes home and puts his backpack in the right place, praise him. And boy, I'm talking to myself now. I need to do that as well. I need to focus on that with my children, of praising them more often than I do. I'm definitely speaking out loud to myself. The kid puts away his clothes after you did the laundry. Single that act out for praise. Again, we've got to ask ourselves, would I also feel loved if I were getting as much criticism? And if the answer is not, that I wouldn't feel as loved, then we need to work on that. Heed the discipline of a father. Listen and learn discernment. Verse 2, Ki lekach tov natati lachem, torati al ta'azovu. For I give you good instruction. Do not forsake my teaching. The word lekach can also be understood in a Talmudic legal sense as an acquisition. Torah and biblical values are an acquisition. It's something that we should make a part of us, just as we would value and treasure something that we spent our hard-earned money on, much more than we would if something were just given to us as a gift. That's how we need to treat good values that we get from God through the Bible. And King Solomon here is telling us, perhaps he's speaking for God, or maybe he's speaking for himself, that the wisdom of the Bible, or the wisdom of the book of Proverbs, is good instruction. Trust me on this, says Solomon. It's good instruction. It is worthwhile to listen to what I have to say. Do not forsake my teaching. It will do you good to listen to this, because these are values based on eternal principles. It's not just based on a whim. Solomon is not coming up with this on his own. He's coming up with it based on a God-based system that works. Verse 3, Kiven hayiti le'avi, rach v'yachid lifnei imi. Once I was a son to my father, the tender darling of my mother. You'll notice that this verse is referring to the singular, Kiven hayiti le'avi. It doesn't say banim, the plural. It says I was a son to my father, not sons or children, the tender darling of my mother. And what this could be implying is that we need to be concerned about our children, about each children. We need to guide them as if each one was our only child. If we knew that we only were going to be blessed with one child, we would pour our heart and soul into that child. We would make sure that that child was best prepared for the life ahead of him. We would make sure to guide and instruct that child in the best way that we possibly could. And it's a very big challenge for those of us who, thank God, have been blessed with many children. My wife Michal and I, thank God, have been blessed with 5 wonderful, healthy, responsible, and respectful children. Of course, they have their moments of being not respectful. Any child has. But in general, they're good kids. They're very good kids. Now, this doesn't mean that we're going to interact with all of our children equally. In other words, in the same fashion. We're going to have a verse later in the book of Proverbs which says, educate the child according to his way. There are different ways to interact with different children. There are certain children we need to be stricter with. Other children, if we are too strict with them, they're just going to turn off. So we need to know how to interact. But I think what this verse is telling us is that we need to cherish each child and give the attention to each child as if this child were our own. So each child feels like he or she is the most special child in the world. We know from the book of Genesis, we look in chapter 37, when it discusses the story of Joseph, the beginning of the story of Joseph and his brothers. The problem in that case was where Jacob not only interacted with Joseph as if, well, not that it's not only, he interacted with Joseph as if Joseph were the only son, where in fact there were 11 others. Now Joseph was his favorite because Joseph was born to Jacob's favorite wife, Rachel. Joseph was the firstborn of Rachel, but Jacob took it too far. He He really interacted with Joseph as if Joseph were the only show in town, whereas there were 11 others as well. Verse 4, Vayoreni vayomer li yitmoch dvarai libecha shmor mitzvotai vechiyeh. He instructed me and said to me, let your mind hold on to my words, keep my commandments, and you will live. This is Solomon speaking about his father, who of course was the first king to come from the line of Judah, King David. Now notice what Solomon says here. It wasn't that I saw my father doing A, B, and C, and I learned from that, which is definitely important. To lead by example, that's the best way for parents to teach children. It cannot be do as I say, not as I do. We need to both act in the proper way, but also, and this is what Solomon is saying, we need to speak in the proper way, in that we need to transmit these values to our children. We can't just assume that it's going to come through osmosis, that they're going to get it from society. In fact, there are many times when we specifically would not want our children to get their values from society. We need to spend time with our children, quality time and quantity time. Both are critical, so that we'll be able to transmit the values that we hold dear, that our parents hopefully have transmitted to us. It doesn't happen by accident. But here Solomon is saying that David, his father, said to him, didn't just lead by example, but he said to him as well, let your mind hold on to my words. Keep my commandments, and you will live. David actively transmitted the value system that he wanted his son to live by to his son. Both are necessary, both the verbalization and the acting out of how we want our children to live. Finally, verse 5, Kenei chokhmah, kenei vina, al tishkach ve'al tet me'imrei fi. Acquire wisdom, acquire discernment. Forget and do not swerve from my words. These first four words, both in Hebrew and in English, acquire discernment, that I think is a great summary for the book of Proverbs. There may be other times when I say this, but certainly up till now, I think this is a great summary, the entire book of Proverbs. If you want to understand how to deal with the complexity of life, not if you want to understand physics, if you want to understand chemistry, biology, there you need to go to someone who is very smart, who has a lot of knowledge in a certain area. But if you want to deal with the great issues in life, if you want to understand the nature of human interaction, if you want to understand what is the proper way to conduct yourself as an honest and respectful human being, don't necessarily go for the knowledge. Go for the wisdom. Because if we acquire wisdom, then we will acquire discernment, and hopefully it will also lead to acquiring knowledge, and then we will be able to speak on a level that others will be able to understand, where we will be able to transmit the values that we hold as important to others as well. For Root Source, this has been Rabbi Aryeh Leifert teaching Proverbially Speaking, wisdom from the book of Proverbs. I look forward to seeing you at our next session.